We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 71b. The Gemara here is continuing with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that a husband is only allowed to annul vows of his wife if they are vows that are considered inoi nefesh. And another example of a vow that's considered inoi nefesh is bevigdei tzivonim. Let's say she says she's not going to adorn herself with colored clothing. As Rashi says, bevigdei tzivonim genayu v'zoyin hola. That's already considered a genai. It's degrading to her. Umisgana olav. That's already considered something that's going to be that he's not going to take a liking to her anymore. So those are the cases. But let's say it would be a case where she says she's not going to put on certain perfumes. Apparently he cannot annul the vow, yet we just said in the previous Amud that he could annul that vow according to Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara answers, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here what are we talking about? B'dvarim shebeino leveino. We're talking about issues that are of private matters. Rashi over here says, Hacha b'mayaskin on kisha demasnis and dehacha. Our mission over here that talks about adorning, where it says he is allowed to annul the vow, that's b'dvarim shebeino leveino. Rashi understands that to mean Sam HaMesher Asar. We're talking about things that are used to remove the hair on her. So that already is something that would be considered a vow that he would be allowed to annul, because again, similar to the Big Day Tzivonim, that would be an issue that's considered to get in the way of the marriage, and therefore he could annul such a vow. But the Gemara continues, that's good according to the one who says that if you have these issues that pertain to private matters, the husband is allowed to annul the vow. But there's another mandamar who says that if it's that if it's just a private matter, the husband is actually not allowed to annul the vow, so this won't be a good answer. So what are you going to say according to that opinion? Because we have the following machlokas amuroim. Let's say she takes a vow and it's a private matter, it's nothing that's going to be displayed in public. Rav Huna Amar Habal Mefer. Rav Huna says that the husband's allowed to annul the vow, and Rav Ada bar Ava Amar Eina Bal Mefer. And Rav Ada bar Ava says that the husband is not allowed to annul such a vow. Shalom Matzinu Shuel Shemes Ba'afar Pir. We don't find that a fox dies in the hole that it lives in, as Rashi over here says. Ba'afar Pir Ba'afar Chorshu Gadol Sham. In other words, the area where that fox is raised is not dangerous for it. Kilomar B'davar Shu Ragel Bo Baki Uli Shamar Sheinu Maziko. Let's say you assume that if she doesn't remove this hair, in theory it could be damaging, but it isn't going to be damaging. It's something the husband is accustomed to, and that's why Rav Ada bar Ava says he's not allowed to annul the vow. And in any case, we're not able to use this as an answer for Rabbi Yossi. And so the Gemara answers, and rather here, what are we talking about in our Mishnah where we're saying that he is allowed to annul the vow? Let's say she made the act of relations that became dependent upon her adorning herself. The Yamar, for example, she said, the pleasure of having relations with you should be prohibited to me if I adorn myself. So she's saying, if I adorn myself, then it's prohibited for me to have relations with you. And there already, it's an issue of tashmish, and that's already something which he's allowed to annul. Kedamar Rav Kahana, like Rav Kahana said, Damar Rav Kahana, like Rav Kahana said, Hanoas tashmishi olecha. Let's say she says the hanoah of having relations with me is going to be prohibited to you. That's what she says to the husband. So kofa misham shaso, so he's allowed to force her to have relations. But let's say the other way around, Hanoas tashmishcha alai, the pleasure of having relations with you is upon me, it's prohibited to me. She's making herself prohibited in having the pleasure. Yafer, then he is allowed to annul that vow, which is what we're saying over here. Because we're not going to give somebody to eat something that's prohibited to him. In other words, in this particular situation, we have to make it that it is permitted so he can annul the vow, so he can perform this act of relations. And Rashi over here explains, again, she made the act of relations dependent on the adornment, and that's why over here he's allowed to annul the vow. The deal is because otherwise maybe she'll adorn herself, and then suddenly the tashmish will be usher, which will be a problem that allows the annulment of the vow. And as we said, kofu misham shasov, she tries to make it prohibited to him, so then he can actually force her. She's not able to make herself prohibited to him. She can't put the prohibition on him. However, she is in theory able to make him usher to her, that the prohibition is for her to get benefit, for her to get pleasure. Shetehi mudaris, that she's the mudaris, velohu, and not him. In other words, she says that the pleasure of having relations with him will be prohibited to her. That now over there he's going to need to annul the vow, because right now she's made it prohibited for her to get pleasure, and that would be a problem if he's going to give her to eat, so to speak, something that's now prohibited to her. So he annuls the vow, and then they can have relations. But the Gemara continues, even if she made the adornment dependent with the tashmish, v'lo tiskashet, v'lo tiyasser, what's the problem? What do you need to annul the vow for? Just let her not adorn herself, and she won't be prohibited, and then there won't be a problem. Why is there a need for a hafaras nadarim over here? And to that, the Gemara says, no, imkain karu la menuvelas v'tiskashet. If you don't annul the vow, what's going to happen is people will call her a menuvelas, they'll embarrass her, and she will end up adorning herself. That's something she won't be able to stop, and therefore it could end up being a problem, so you need to annul the vow. But the Gemara continues, v'tiskashet v'teyaser, but let her adorn herself and let her be prohibited in terms of relations. But ila beis Shammai shtei shabbos, ila beis Hillel shabbos achas. But still, according to beis Shammai, they should be able to maintain the marriage for 2 weeks. According to beis Hillel, they should be able to maintain the marriage for 1 week. Our Mishnah said that they have to divorce immediately. That's what Rabbi Yossi said because of the fact that he didn't annul it. Rabbi Yossi simply implied that he could have annulled it, but he did not. But still, why does it say the divorce has to be immediate? We learned earlier that they should be able to maintain the marriage for some period of time. Rashi over here says, "V'tiskashet v'teyaser ila beis Shammai amay yotzi la'alter v'yiteng ksuba." Why does he have to divorce her immediately and give the ksuba just because he maintained this neder? V'tiskashet v'teyaser, let her adorn herself, let her be prohibited. V'havas like kamader isishto mitash v'shamita, should be no different than when he made a neder prohibiting the act of relations. Utanan v'perek afalpi, we learned in the Mishnah earlier, this was quoted on the previous Amud, lebeis Shammai shtei shabbos, lebeis Hillel shabbos achas, that according to beis Shammai it's 2 weeks, according to beis Hillel it's 1 week. Our Mishnah seems to say that they have to get divorced immediately. And so to that, the Gemara answers, Hani mili heicha the adra iu. That's only true in a situation, let's say he's the one that made the neder. So there they can maintain the marriage for a short amount of time. The savra mirtach rosachi lavoy, because she thinks to herself, right now he's angry, it's a temporary thing. V'hashta mosif daita, he'll calm down, and then we can continue the marriage. Avalacha, but over here, the nadra iu v'shasakla, where she's the one that makes the neder, and then he's quiet instead of annulling it, savra mi de ishtik misnahu de sanili. She thinks, from the fact that he's quiet, he must hate me, and therefore in this particular case, we do not maintain the marriage at all. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yossi Omer ba'aniyos shelo nasan kitzvah. Rabbi Yossi said, if you're talking about a woman who is poor, so then if this neder was made that she can't have perfume and there was no set amount of time, so then they have to divorce immediately. But if there was a set amount of time, so then they can maintain the marriage for that amount of time. But the Gemara says, v'kama kitzvah, but how much is this amount of time? It can't be too long of a period of time. Rashi says, v'kama kitzvah kolomar, im nasan kitzvah, let's say he did give a set amount of time, ad kama lo kaifina leilhotzi, for how long do we allow him to maintain the marriage with this neder in place, that she can't put on perfumes, and that we do not force them to divorce? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says Yud Beis Chodesh, we allow it for 12 months. If this neder is in place for 12 months, they can maintain the marriage, but if it's a time period longer than 12 months, so then already they have to divorce. Rav Bar Bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan Eser Shonim, Rav Bar Bar Chana says that Rav Yochanan says 10 years. Rav Chisda Amar Avimai, Rav Chisda says that Avimai says regel, it's 1 regel, meaning to the next holiday. Shekein Benos Yisrael Miskashtos Beregel, because the custom was that the Jewish girls, they would adorn themselves on the regel at the time of the holiday. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Uvashirus lamed yom, for wealthier women, so then this neder can be in place for 30 days, but more than 30 days, so then they need to divorce. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna lamed yom, what's the difference, 30 days? Where do we come up with this number? Amar Abaya says, Shekenisha chashuva nenis mereach kishuteha lamed yom, because a woman who is a chashuv, an important person, she benefits from the smell of this perfume for 30 days. It lasts on her for 30 days. After 30 days already, she doesn't feel good about it, and therefore that is the time limit. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamadir is ishto shelo teilech levei savil. Let's say somebody makes a neder upon his wife that she's not allowed to go to her father's house. Bizman shu ima b'ir, if the father is with her in the same city, so in such a situation, chodesh echad yekayim, they can maintain the marriage like this for 1 month, shnayim yotzi, but for 2 months to prevent her from going to her father's house, then already he has to divorce her, v'yit and ksuba, and give the ksuba. Uvizman shu bir acheres, now in a situation where the father is in a different city, so regel echad yekayim, they can maintain this for 1 holiday. The general custom was they would visit their parents on the holidays, but shlosha, but if it's already for 3 holidays, yotzi v'yit and ksuba, then again he has to divorce her and give the ksuba. The Gemara will ask what's going to be if it's 2 holidays. And the Mishnah continues, Hamadir es ishto shelo teilech leveis ha'avil, or leveis ha'mishta. Let's say a person makes a neder on his wife that she's not allowed to go to a mourner's house, or she cannot go to a feast. So yotzi v'yit and ksuba, then he has to divorce her, and he has to pay her the ksuba, memnesha noel b'foneh, because then it's like he's locking the door in front of her. The Gemara will explain that. Now, if the reason why he's saying this is because he has some kind of a concern, some kind of inappropriate conduct on her behalf, Rashoy, then he is permitted. Amar lo, now let's say he says to her, Manasha Tamri Leploni Masha Martali. Let's say she says, on the condition that you tell so and so what you said to me. O Masha Martilach, or what I said to you. O Shetahim Malu Maor La Ashbor, or he tells her she has to fill something up and pour it into the ashba, into the garbage. And the Gemara will explain these cases. Yotzi Vita and Ksuba. If he says those kind of conditions, he has to divorce her and give her a ksuba. And the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, the Mishnah itself is internally contradictory. Amrit Regel Echad Yikayim. First you say that if it's one holiday, so then they maintain the marriage. Hashnayim Yotzi sounds like if he's preventing her from going to her father's house for 2 holidays, so then Yotzi Vita and Ksuba, he has to divorce her and give the ksuba. Ema Seifa, now look at the end of the Mishnah. Shlosha Yotzi Vita and Ksuba. If it's 3 holidays, he divorces her and gives her the ksuba. Hashnayim Yikayim, that sounds like 2 holidays, he can maintain the marriage. So we have a contradiction. What would be the halacha? Let's say she's prevented through this neder from going to her father's house for 2 holidays. And the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya says, Seifa ason lekohenes. In the Seifa, we're talking about a situation of a kohenes, as we said earlier, when a kohen gets married, so he's not allowed to marry a divorcee, so we allow them to maintain the marriage for a longer period of time, and that's what's going on at the end of the Mishnah. We're talking about a kohen, and therefore he can maintain that marriage for 2 holidays. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Yehuda, and according to that, this would follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda was the one in the earlier Mishnah who made that distinction between a Kohen and a Yisrael. And the Gemara continues, Rabba Bar Ula Amar, Rabba Bar Ula says, Lokash, it's not difficult, Kan Berdufa, Kan B'Shein Redufa, it just depends on the nature of the woman. In one case, we're talking about a woman who is Redufa, meaning she always wants to go to her father's house. And in the other case, we're talking about Eina Redufa, she's not so eager to go to her father's house. Rashi over here says, Redufa Leilech Lebeis Avia Tamid. If she always goes to her father, so Shnayim Yotzi, then even 2 holidays he has to divorce her, because she wants to go to her father's house. She's eager to go to her father's house. She'eina Redufa, Shnayim Yikayim. But let's say it's a situation where she's not so eager, so then he can even maintain the marriage if it was 2 holidays. And the Gemara continues, quoting a pasuk from Shir Ashirim, Oz hayisi be'einav kemotzeis shalom. Then I was in his eyes like someone who had found peace. What does that pasuk mean? Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Kekala shenimtzes shalema beveis chamer. It's like a kala who is found to be complete in the house of her father-in-law. Ureduva leilech ulahagit shivcha beveis avia. And she's eager to go and tell of the praises that she's getting from her father-in-law's house. She's eager to tell her father. That's what that pasuk is referring to, meaning to say that she is comfortable in her marriage, comfortable in the house of her husband. And the Gemara continues, V'haya bayamahu nu'um Hashem tikri ishi v'lo tikri li od bali. This is a pasuk in Hosea. It says that on that day you're going to call me your husband, and you're not going to call me your master. And the Gemara explains, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Kekala beveis chameha v'lo kekala beveis avia. Again, it's like a kala who's already in her father-in-law's house. She's used to her husband. She refers to her husband as her husband, and not like a kala while she's still in her father's house, at which point she refers to her husband as her master. And the Gemara continues with the 2 dots, Hamadiris Ishto V'chulo, somebody makes a neder for his wife, and the Gemara says, B'shalom Leveis HaMishta. I understand in the case where he makes a neder that she's not allowed to go to the Beis HaMishta, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Beis Amud Aleph.